Good evening, I'm DK Rostar. Welcome back to the TTT News. We continue to have important conversations en route to determining those next steps, and we do so with 4 individuals representing CSOs or civil society organizations that stood up and were counted and continue to do so. We have Élysse Marcellin of Womantra, Angelique Nixon of CAISO, Sex and Gender Justice, Ashlee Burnett of Feminitt, and Renuka Anandjit, IGDS Ignite. So we want to say thank you so much, ladies, for taking the time. And Ashlee, we see you on. So we want to start with you, thank you, in terms of your feelings at this time and what are some of the things that we need to look at? Examples, sexual rights and health, labor, patriarchal systems, systemic and structural violence. We'll let you take it away, thanks.
Thank you so much, DK. At this time, it's a very scary and fearful time. I think, like myself, there are so many other young women who are filled with terror. So many of us have to take public transportation. And I mean, school was open on Monday. And so there are lots of secondary students who have no choice but to travel. And so it's filled with that fear of being unsure of whether or not entering a taxi is going to mean that you're not going to return home. And so a lot of these issues are grounded in a lot of things that's way deeper than, that we are actually looking right now. And I think that we need to now examine the root of how these systems actually perpetuate the kind of culture that we have now. So examining rape culture, examining how violent our systems can be and how we ourselves determine how we're supposed to deal with those systems of violence. And I think it's something that we have to look and pull apart and determine how do we take our next steps. And right here, there are a lot of people who are representing CSOs and even persons who would have been out on the streets for the past week and however long, demanding better and really putting forward these solutions. And I think that's, the first step in making a brighter future.
And let me welcome Renuka to the conversation, asking the same question, but also taking it a little further as well in terms of asking what your organizations are doing at this point in time.
Sure. Thank you so much for giving us space and allowing us the opportunity to really share our work. And like Ashlee said, there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of hurt in the nation right now. But one of the good things, and it's a bit interesting to say one of the good things to come out is just to see how outraged the nation is and all the actions. There's so many different actions that are being taken across the country by young people, by different kinds of groups, by just individuals, vigils, protests. We just had a protest today where a couple of people, gentlemen, were arrested. And, the protest actions are just one part of a nation demanding better from our state and the state actors. And one of those things that we have been doing at IGDS Ignite is we just launched a Right Share MP campaign. And what we're trying to do is really, helping persons to streamline what we really want the state to do. We want persons to come out and say that we are so tired. We want change in transportation policies. We want more funding. We want more resource investment. And this is an opportunity for persons, citizens and residents of Trinidad and Tobago to come out and tell your MP. So what we've done is we have provided a letter template for persons. We've provided mailing addresses, email addresses for your resident MP, including phone numbers. You can contact them. We've also included suggestions on issues. If you're not sure what you want to write about, you want to write about something, we have that. And you can find that information on our Instagram and Twitter pages at IGDS Ignite. And you can also get the information from our partners, because this is part of an action of a coalition of youth-led organizations, IGDS Ignite, Feminitt, the Youth Humanitarian Network, the UE Guild of Students, because a lot of the persons are young people who are really actively speaking out, and that is really heartening. And there are so many others. Womantra is doing their Rights Deconstructed campaign right now, looking at the National Sexual and Reproductive Health Policy. They're working on a police tool training kit. There's a legal clinic. CAISO is also doing the 6 demands with their wholeness and justice program. The communities, we just started a youth feminist coalition where we issued a collective statement over the weekend demanding reform for the public transportation system, the police reform, and just educational reform. So these are some of the key actions that are coming out of this moment that we are in as we mourn as a nation.
Thank you so much, Renuka. And you spoke about the work that is being done by Womantra at this point in time. And so we'll bring Élysse in at this to also kind of carry forward in terms of saying, okay, what are your feelings and what is Womantra doing right now? We see we've actually started to show some of those demands that you all have taken the time to draft. And as the conversation continues, we will show some more of them, as well as the intro, I guess, image to the Write Your MP campaign. So, ball is in your court, Élysse.
Thanks, TK. Yeah, I think the feelings are shared. Both of my colleagues have expressed them quite well. The sense of frustration and hopelessness is there, but there's also this sense of hopefulness that kind of contradicts those other negative feelings, because we're seeing people taking action, and we're hoping that these can be translated into short, medium, and long-term strategic action plans that actually tackle the root causes of gender-based violence, as opposed to just addressing the symptoms. And some of the things that we're currently, calling on the government to think through a little bit more strategically and actively engage in processes to activate these demands would be to implement the National Strategic Gender-Based Violence Action Plan. And we understand that that's been in draft, it's been circulated for some years now, but we haven't seen it actually get translated into anything meaningful, where there's a coordinated mechanism for activating this strategy. So among those, strategic plans and actions, we would like to see them actually implement a coordination mechanism for civil society to be more actively engaged in the work that the government is doing. We understand how under-resourced and underfunded civil societies are, and particularly the institutions that provide support to victims, such as shelters and NGOs that offer other legal and social support services. And so we would like to also have them seriously think through the budget allocations to support state mechanisms as well as civil society mechanisms, the implementation of something like a social fund that could work similarly to the Green Fund levy, whereby NGOs that are actively engaged in this work can activate a mechanism to get that support to continue doing the work so that it doesn't fall on the state's shoulders all the time. But also I think this is an easy workaround to the gaps, particularly regarding vulnerable populations such as the LGBTQI and the migrant populations who are not actively engaged in strategic planning. I think it could be a meaningful method of getting them to offer this support without having to implement any new laws or policies. They could offer this support to the NGOs that do that work. And one of the, two of the main other issues I think that need to be considered, as well as state accountability. We keep hearing the Attorney General talk about all of these legislations, these laws that he keeps, trying to activate and bring in and get these opposition support for. But one of the gaps is still the actual monitoring and evaluation of state mechanisms, and using a data-driven approach to do this, understanding how the institutions that are meant to serve these causes are actually functioning, and addressing gaps in the implementation of the systems that they have actually carded. And to finally round it off with some programs that focus more on cultural reformation, because the actual fact of the matter at this point is that this is not just about failing state mechanisms anymore. It's much bigger than just the failing state mechanisms. It's also about cultural reform and addressing violence from the root causes, and understanding our post-colonial history and its impact on where we are today and the trajectory that we've been on, and understanding why violence has become such a core part of our culture and our means to our ends for almost everything, when in fact there could be some more meaningful effort placed on engaging in community efforts, conflict resolution, anger management, parenting classes, these kinds of cultural things that would help us to reformat and shift our focus altogether.
Thank you so much, Élysse. And Angelique, we're going to bring you in at the other side of the conversation, because we're going to take a break now. But there are two things that Élysse raised in terms of identifying gaps. And one thing we would have seen in the pandemic or response to the pandemic was a great deal of gaps. We may not address them now, but looking at strategic actions that follow incremental steps and the importance of that, because I've seen some people saying, okay, well, here they are marching again. What sense that make? That's just reactive. We give you a chance to answer all that and more when we return. Stay with us.
Well, last I see an MP. Anybody have MP inside here? Tell me, call them out. Yes? Hear the story. Listening me radio one day, I hear the announcer say, all you call in and tell we, when last you see your MP. I was in my living room, I turn up my volume. It's now I listening, got this thing songing interesting. Then he say, this have nothing to do with your party or who you vote for, but call and talk the truth about your MP. Whether you're from east, west, north or south, all you know what we talking about. The lines are open. This is your chance to call them out.
This is your chance to call them out. This is a song from 2014, Brian London. Call out your MP. And it is not a political matter. It is not something that we are supposed to be taking sides on. But Angelique, let me bring you into the conversation, please, because I want to give you the opportunity to answer the people who would be saying, okay, well, this is something that is reactive once again, even as you have a platform and an opportunity to share your feelings, what is happening, and the calls for better that have been drafted into a very readable and workable format.
Well, to say thank you so much, DK, for having us all on. To say that it's only reactive, I think we need to remember that organizations who've been doing work on gender-based violence have long called for state accountability and government demands. And in fact, a coalition of organizations started doing some of this work, led by a number from Coalition Against Domestic Violence to Conflict Women, as well as Womantra and CAISO. And we really spearheaded the move to articulate and express these clear demands that focus on state accountability and holding the government accountable and saying these are the things we need. So these demands, as we've been sharing, which very much line up with the youth-led organizations and activist demands, and they've also signed on to these 6 clear demands that are focused on government responsibility and accountability. And Élysse would have already laid out a number of those demands, but I want to highlight one that we added. So these demands have been growing and really being clearly expressed to the government from January 25th of last year, and a petition delivered in February even. But we've amended the demands because some issues like the domestic violence amendment did happen in June. But in light of what's happened recently, we've made a clear statement that we want changes to the public transportation system. We have made some recommendations like develop an urgent response and system of safety, mandatory GBV training, background checks, a complaint system, of course ensuring taxis and drivers are registered. This is under the government purview. They must absolutely do this, and they can do it. The youth organizations have also have very specific demands around public transportation and safety. The other thing that I will say is not reactive, but is literally something many organizations have called on. CSOs have been calling for more support for the actual state agencies that deal with gender-based violence. So the newly established GBV unit, we've been calling for a budget. We've asked, how is this being resourced? The victim and witness support unit that's long been established, what is the budget? How are they being supported? The Gender and Child Affairs Division, how are they being supported? What is the budgetary allocation, right? So this has led us, I think, this year to call for a national emergency on GBV. We want the government to say this is serious, just as any other issue is serious. We want regular updates. We want to see as a public and civil society that we are calling for, yes, we will work with you. We want the government to take this issue seriously. Puerto Rico just declared a state of emergency around gender-based violence. The whole world is dealing with this pandemic and the rise in gender-based violence. It is an epidemic. It is a serious as COVID-19, and it is exacerbated through economic crisis, through climate crisis, through all of the things that we're going through. So we are simply saying to the government, you have to take this seriously, declare a national emergency, and therefore you will allocate resources and attention and accountability to this issue. And we want to work with you. I think that's what all of the organizations are saying, and we invite the public to continue acting, agitating, and join the campaign to write to MP. Join these demands, put them out in the public sphere as they already are circulating. Add your ideas. How do we think about community actions? Invest in restorative justice, as Élysse already said. How do we think about community policing? How do we get at the root causes of the issues? How do we transform our education system so we're teaching issues of consent, and we're teaching issues of understanding our bodies and talking to boys and girls and young people about empowerment of themselves so that we can get at the root causes of gender-based violence and the related forms of violence in our society. And these are all connected, right? We have to talk through and think about racial violence, class violence, economic violence. These things are all connected, and they make and really make our situations even worse. And so we really do need to do some work around just, only policing and only certain forms of solutions are not going to get at the root. So when you look at our demands and when you see what the youth organizations are saying, let's do something, we're recognizing that the state has to do something, civil society organizations have to do something, and each and every one of us that live in Trinidad and Tobago have to do something.
And with about 2.5 minutes in this conversation, definitely we can't articulate everything that needs to be done. But while we give a little idea of some of the CSOs that are involved in this kind of action, I want to go back to Ashlee and ask some of the infrastructure or the institutions that you would suggest we get support from. And I really am grateful that you would have highlighted the fact that this is not separate issues that we're dealing with, Angelique. But Ashlee, what are some of those institutions that you think you need resources going to or resources coming from?
So as Angelique and even Élysse would have shared earlier, there are so many, women's shelters that unfortunately had to be closed down during the pandemic because of the lack of funding. There are so many CSOs, even right here on this call, even right here, on this interview, and even different agencies that work towards ending gender-based violence. So give funding to organizations that work towards ending gender-based violence, such as Womantra. There is IGDS Ignite. There is the Coalition Against Domestic Violence. There's so many other NGOs here in Trinidad and Tobago that's working towards this. And of course, it's severely underfunded because a lot of the times when there is a lack in state offerings, people turn to NGOs. And so in order for that to be able to work in tandem, for there to be some sort of something that people can go to, there must be funding. And so that is the next step in working towards these policies, but also funding these NGOs to get the work done.
And I'll ask you the same question, please, Renuka.
I'm sorry, I lost you. Same question?
In terms of, yes.
So outside of CSOs, community investment, I think we also need to think about how we're approaching social reform. We need to look at the education institution. We need to think about our health and family life education program and introducing comprehensive sexuality education. All of these things, sexual rights, they're related. And if we change our approach, we mainstream, we ensure that CSC is there. We have proper HFLE programs that is implemented across the board, where we're teaching young people about negotiation skills, conflict resolution skills. These are some institutional changes and programs that can really help to mitigate violence, because we're teaching them life skills and we're giving them information necessary to really counteract this culture of violence that we push, that the media advances, that's present in our language through heteronormative actions. Just, LGBT people face a lot of discrimination in health institutions, in education institutions across the board, even in our justice sector. So these are some of the areas that we really need to think about how we're approaching institutional support. So funding is one thing, training is a whole another one, and it can't be one-off trainings. They have to be sustained trainings. You do trainings, you do refresher trainings, because There are different skills as we're evolving as a society, as our needs are evolving. And now these are opportunities that we have. And like Angelique said, we call on the government, the state actors, to really work with us as civil society organizations. We are stakeholders. Us as young people,
and being stakeholders, we are bound by the confines of this conversation at this point in time, but we will continue to provide that platform for these things towards next steps. So ladies, we want to thank you very much. And on behalf of the entire news team, I'm DK Rossa. Thank you for joining us. Have a good night.